Welcome everybody to the SIG API Machinery meeting from Kubernetes. Today is December 1st, last month of the year of 2021, and we have a couple of topics in our agenda to discuss. The first one is one that we didn't make to discuss last time, so we made sure today we have the people to cover it, and then we will continue in order. So, without any further said, let's begin with the first one. Stefan, do you want to take it?
Yes, trying to remember all the details. I hope I get it right. So resource quotas can bound the number of objects, and this is about resource names, if I get it right. I think I missed some context, so once again I have to reread. Simon, you are not here, right? You promised to join.
But we have you, who I remember worked with resource quotas in the past, so maybe he can answer some of your questions.
Yeah, so there are two different name limits. One is about CRD names, so there can be 253, and this is a topic we had, I think, and the DNS segment is of this length. But in the quota objects, it looks like, and there's a link, that they are restricted to 63, and this looks like an oversight.
So are you saying that it is possible to create a CRD whose resource name, like as a replication controller, or sorry, that was a very old one, like pods or like services, you can have my really cool CRD that has a super long name that was probably a German word and is therefore 100 characters long, can be created, and that interferes with the ability to specify a quota resource name that means count of objects of this type.
That's a correct summary.
Aha.
And the name, I think. No.
So I'm sorry.
There was a real example for that. Yeah.
It would be really helpful, I think, to place that, because only someone who knows what goes in the resource name and how it is related to the name of the type itself is ever going to understand that based on your description here. And there's like 10 of us.
Right. So let me just make sure I caught that correctly, because I didn't understand that. You're telling me the problem here is that for a resource quota object, its name is limited to 63 characters, but its name also has to be a specific function, which is a concatenation of some other resource, some other object's name, plus some fixed stuff. And no. The name of the resource quota object itself is immaterial, but there is a field on resource quotas that is called resource name. And a resource name represents the thing that you're counting and goes inside of a resource list. I'm trying to think whether maybe it'd be easier if I sent links to the API or something, but yeah, we have this concept of a resource list that says these are the things you are quotaing. One of the things you can represent as a resource name is I want to count how many pods, or I want to count how many foos, and if you specify a type of foo, where my really long CRD type name is greater than the maximum length allowed for a resource name, I could imagine how you would have trouble. So shorten it down. The problem here is in the resource quota object, there's a field for resource or type name, and that's limited to 63 characters. But in fact, those things are not really limited to 63 characters.
Yes. David, I sent you a Baxilla. There's no real example. I had one in Slack, but I don't see it. This is artificial, but it shows the error message. So yes, this is resource quota. Quota test is invalid. And then you have this combination of resource name and group name concatenated. and that must be below 63.
Oh, it's so it's the resource name including the group and version, or just the group. Okay.
Without version, I think.
Yeah, it's just the group.
Including group.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this, I mean, you can imagine 63 bytes are not many, right? There's a group which has 20.
True. It does remind me of Tester walks into a bar. But it would be a very small PR to try to change it. I think.
Yeah, and the question is, do we want that?
The consequence here is unfortunate. Trying to think about every client that would break is difficult, though. So,
client which would break, clients which don't have enough space for the resource quota string,
or rely on it being shorter for some other reason. It's hard to imagine. Like this one's a little esoteric. It's not like changing a name, right? If you actually changed a true name, that'd be a really big deal. Something would break because someone would use that.
Yeah, I think it's
DNS name.
As his argument with the special characters we had in the past, I think the impact is bigger. Here it feels like less impact.
I think it's worth bringing up, explaining the actual failure. It would be cool if you could find an actual example, but I don't think you can. Not one that I know of.
I think it was real. It was a real example. I don't know, Knative or something like that. I don't know.
Okay. But it would also be small effort to show what would end up changing. And then I would suggest waiting until next year so that we have more people to come in and think about what else would break. I don't see anything offhand because it's an esoteric field.
How did you find out? Did you run into an actual problem yourself, Stefan?
Yeah, we have a Bugzilla here, and it's a real problem. I think it wasn't Knative. It was some transformation of cloud APIs which have long names already. And they want
it's those same guys that created like 700 CRDs. I mean, okay.
Yeah, I mean that's what
it's maybe the same
expect,
case,
right? For generated resource names that are coming from somewhere else, I can easily imagine you find yourself concatenating a bunch of stuff together, and it gets more than 63 characters.
So the resource is authoritative egress firewall IP ranges resources .openpath.foo cloud.com.
I think your next, because it's so easy to change, I think your next step is actually a PR and then waiting until next year. And in case people didn't notice, next year is like 2 working weeks away. So
sounds fine. Yeah, just leave it here on the agenda, and for next year we can, when people are here, we can bring it up quickly.
Well,
again.
PR would make it really clear what you want to change. Your description here is actually very difficult to read and parse.
Well, it was just sort of an issue that clearly identifies the issue.
Yeah, either. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's go to the next one. Mike, you proposed 2, so let's go with the pagination.
Right. Yeah, this has come up before, and it kind of came up tangentially the previous meeting, and there was some encouragement to follow up on it. So let's just do this, right? We have this idea that the API server can paginate responses, but we've never gotten around to implementing the pagination for responses that are coming from the watch cache. And we do have some problems with large responses. In our work on priority and fairness, it's really just a matter of server self-protection. Just managing these large responses are a problem. I mean, large responses are a problem, whether you manage them or not, right? So we ought to be able to. I think it's would logically be beneficial to paginate the responses that come from the watch cache. I'm not the expert on how to implement this, so I was hoping there are other people that can pitch in on the actual doing of it. I had a thought that it seems to me logical that the etcd cluster would have the similar problem. Someone started to say, nah, but we ran out of time. So that's where we ended on it.
I like the topic. I have kind of a counter proposal I might talk about in a second. I just know that Clayton commented on that. He did the implementation, I think, for etcd or for the non-cached results.
He did pagination, but Wojtek did the watch cache.
Can be. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, the basic answer is complexity to re-implement that and value of the implementation. There is one core problem with the cache. Obviously, it can be outdated. We have no answer today to get a guaranteed fresh, consistent results, which could be done, but we don't do it today. And we moved away from the watch cache to fill informers, partly because pagination is necessary, but the real reason is that the watch cache is not consistent, and this means you can have time travel. Time travel when you change the HA instance you talk to the API server. There's a long issue. I could link for that. That's the background.
So let me just understand that part there, what you're saying about consistent. So in a particular,
fresh.
Well, let me be clear. Let me make sure I understand clearly. So I do understand the idea that different API servers will have, reflect different state in their watch cache. For a given API server, is it fair to say that for a given resource, its watch cache is consistent with some resource version at a given time?
It is. If you're on the same instance, it is consistent. I mean, consistent in ways like you do 2 watches and you get newer data on the second call, if you guarantee you have the same instance. But with a normal client, you cannot do that, right?
Okay, but I think that's a separable issue.
It is.
I think we already have the idea that when you do a list, you get back a resource version, right? So if we did a list from the watch cache and the watch cache is consistent with a particular resource version, we could return that in the list.
Yeah, I mean, for this problem, there are ways around that. An easy way, which is proposed already, you can ask etcd for the latest resource version before starting your watch, and then you wait until the watch cache has caught up, which might take milliseconds or maybe a second if nothing is broke. And then you're guaranteed that the cache is fresh. This could be done. So we could move informers to this model. There's still a fundamental issue with that, and paging doesn't help, I think. You can, if you page, the client doesn't know object size. So it's very easy if you, for example, have big secrets, 2 megabyte secrets. It's super easy to kill an API server with a few requests because each of them gets data, puts it into memory, and maybe this can. Yeah, this would go away, right? This is your point, Bob. Use the watch cache.
Stefan, I have a question. My memory of an informer, that an informer uses a list from my memory was that the informer did not effectively use pagination, that it passed a pagination argument, but that pagination was ignored because every list request for an informer went to the watch cache.
No, it's the other way around.
I thought that's what is correct, right? Because list from an informer sets resource version to 0, which is give me the watch cache.
Right, and so
it uses pagination.
Right,
well, yeah,
it passes pagination, but it's not honored.
Yeah, watch cache.
No, it's the other way around. In the moment I think you pass it, you go to etcd.
Right. I was reviewing that code recently. Yes. If if the request specifies pagination, it does not hit the watch cache.
So the 0 is ignored.
The higher level code steers it away from the watch cache. But I think that's kind of beside the point here, right? We'd like to be able to use the watch
That
cache.
sounds wrong, by the way. I feel like it kills some of the performance.
Okay. Exactly, right? We'd like to be able to use the watch cache for informatives.
So
No, I'm not saying that
out of
I
my
care about the
mind.
watch cache. I was mostly just saying, it seems like a strange behavior. I would expect it to get it from the watch cache, paginated or not.
I remember the OLM bugs in the past where pagination was ineffective because it hit the watch cache, but it was a prior level of Kube, and I haven't looked at the code recently. So
I did a pass on the resource version semantics a while ago, and as part of that, documented it. I'm going to just paste that into chat because it can be helpful in these discussions. This is actually part of working on a very closely related problem. But we actually did make some changes to it. And I think we did get it to the point where when you say resource version is equals 0, you're saying any resource version newer than that is fine. And if you don't provide a resource version, you're basically saying, give me the very latest.
So there is this alternative solution which we discussed with Wojtek a few weeks ago. Pagination is a measure to use a list stack which we have basically, and don't introduce anything else than just limiting the elements returned and have this key return to resume on a second list call and so on. We have a prototype where we switch away from paginated lists completely and just use watch events, even for the initial list of an informer. So the idea is that we use all the infrastructure we have as it is. Tell the server, I want to watch, but I also want to get all objects. An add event for all of them. And please tell me when the initial list, the watch list, is finished. The infrastructure is there. We even have that for legacy reasons. There's actually a way when you do watch, I have to think what the detail was exactly. I think when you say start from 0, you get that for legacy reasons, but it's not used anywhere. But we have that initial events, if you know the code, that's the keyword there. And this gives you basically the same without any pagination implementation. It's streaming for the initial list. Super simple implementation, nothing new.
Right. And I like that for a lot of reasons, but I will say one thing that it leaves unsatisfying to me. In the course of the priority and fairness work, we are, taking on, management of long lists and watch requests. The thing about the watches is, the bigger that initial burst, well, the problem is there's no mechanism to actually pace that initial burst. Right? So we prefer not to have the big initial burst. So having a chunked list that we can manage, is going to enable the management better than an unmanaged initial burst.
So you want to throttle basically this burst in a way.
Right. Now, if we had a way of throttling the burst, that would be okay.
It's a great requirement. We haven't thought about that, but that's a good point. So you have to think with Abu and Wojtek and you probably to see how this would fit PNF. I see the point.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's one thought I had, Mike, which was right now, sometimes we skip the watch cache. We don't always hit the watch cache even though it's enabled. If you ask for something that you want consistency for, we have to hit etcd. There are ways where we can actually check with what etcd and see like what the latest thing is, and then go to the watch cache. I can't remember if we turned any of that on, but like a naive way to turn this on would be like, first, if you can hit the watch cache, you do for a list, but then you trim that list to the limit that the user set. And then if they ask for the next page, you just skip the watch cache. And I'm pretty sure that would be implementable, but then you might not be using the watch cache when you want to. Like it could be that page 2 could also be served from that watch cache.
Gives the value we want, right?
I did provide a code ref. It looks like if resource version equals 0, you skip the watch cache. It intentionally delegates a code ref from the chat.
Okay.
So if you think it works differently, it might be worth building that test, because that code is consistent with the failure that we saw in OLM.
David, just to make sure I just heard you right, you're saying when you set resource version 0, you get the watch cache, right?
Correct, just like you and I both expected.
Yeah. Okay.
But wait, David, isn't there has limit? How does this go into this equation?
This function is painful to read because there's a lot of ands and ors going on.
Yeah. So it basically tells should it go to etcd. This is what this function answers.
Yes.
And has limit is one of those.
But has limit has to be resource version doesn't equal 0 because of the and.
I see. That's true.
So if you're expecting it, like if you thought in a later version OLM would be fixed, that's going to be a thing to, maybe I'm reading that code incorrectly, but that's going to be a thing you want to check.
But this is not about informers then, right? Because informers, they do 0? No, they don't, right?
Well, there's two cases.
With 0. Sorry.
Yes.
No.
Informers use resource version equals 0.
Yeah. They do the initial list with resource version 0, and then they start to watch.
Initial resource version integer 0, I think it makes a difference. If I remember,
yeah, it's intentionally
like
set
the code
0.
But this translates to empty string, if I'm not wrong.
No, it's the string.
I saw the code some days ago.
0, not the bind, like not a number. It's not numeric. It's literally it's not the empty string or so forth.
This doesn't match my memory and doesn't match what Clayton said about that.
So that's just, so if we're trying to figure out our current state, I'm thinking it's going to be worthwhile figuring that out, because I'm fairly sure that this is why we had the perma crash loop caused by a long list hitting a watch cache that would not serialize without pagination.
Right. If you read the URL and the request's coming from an informer, it says, limit =, digit 0, or sorry, resource version equals digit 0, an actual 0 character. Code point 33. I'm sorry, 30. What is it? 32, I guess. No, is that space? Oh, that's right. 48. Right. ASCII character 48.
Does anyone have the client side informer list of this handy, Elaine?
It'll be buried inside the reflector. I don't need to derail the whole thing. It's just so that we understand where we are when we're making statements about we can just do this. I want to make sure we are consistent in what we think this is.
I'm pretty sure the reflector set it to 0 because we at one point were messing around to see if we could make that a strongly consistent thing. And at the time, for performance reasons, we couldn't switch it away. We had to hit the cache if it was there, or it was causing serious performance problems. I think there were ideas on how we could maybe fix that, but I don't think we've gotten those all the way there.
So to make progress, somebody has to read the code, make a summary of that where we are with some links.
Or write a test to prove it one way or another. So
yeah, it's also fine, of course. But maybe this would be an action item to rediscuss that next time.
I think it's certainly useful if the response is going to be try this solution with the current code. We need to be sure the current code behaves as the try this assumes it does.
Okay, I found some code.
Yeah, I've got the reflector code now, and it says hard code to 0.
Right. It's a string with one character, 0 in it.
Yeah, and my interpretation is that is any resource version is a satisfactory response for that. So you can serve it from a eventually consistent watch cache.
So I found the issue that Clayton mentioned. I think that it's not that one. Somebody can open. Not sure who's presenting.
I'm presenting. Where did you put it?
In the agenda.
Yes.
There's a link. That one, yeah.
Oh yeah.
So maybe the issue is open and we have no solution because of performance. That's what you say, Joe, right?
Yeah, this is the one that I had worked on tackling before. I think there is a next step that could make progress on this problem, which I realize is separate than what Mike's asking for specifically. Even if something's in a cache, and you say you want, say you want the latest from etcd, and you don't know what it is, and so, but you still want to serve it from the watch cache if you can. What you could do is you could basically ask etcd, hey, what's your latest revision? And this, I think you mentioned this at the beginning, Stefan. And then what you need to do is you need to wait briefly for your watch cache to catch up, and then only serve it once you've got that revision. And then you get the same guarantee as though you had served it directly from etcd with its consistency guarantees. There is, I could find it maybe, there is a proposed way of doing that that works really nicely with
empty range
semantics.
or something. Empty
range.
Was
I remember we had proposed a couple, and somebody had found a really elegant way to do it that was going to be really fast. So we do know how to do that, but I don't know if it ever got implemented. If we did that, then we can serve consistent reads from the watch cache, which I think is part of the puzzle here. And then if we had that working, then presumably we could stop setting 0 there in the reflector, and you could actually say, I want consistent data, and that prevents any time travel.
I think there was one more topic. If you do a list with neither empty nor 0, but a specific resource version, which is not in cache, that we need probably as well. So you need more, something like weighting mechanism in this case.
Yeah, you can already do, you can ask for a specific resource version. You can even provide an additional match rule. It says, I want that exact resource version, or I want something no older than it. So that's supported. But both of those will miss the watch cache, I think, because you're, I think it's possible to serve them from the watch cache, but we never implemented that, I think, to do those rules because they weren't common cases. We just skipped the watch cache. Related to what Mike was asking, another thing, and this is a little unrelated, on the back end, when we go to etcd, we do paginate at 10K sizes, even if you're asking for the whole thing.
So you're saying the storage layer in the API server paginates its traffic with the etcd, but it just for the purpose of accumulating the whole response in the API server.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Also, looking again at that code that was quoted from cacher.go. Dang it, why do I keep losing that right window here? The reflector.go, I'm sorry, right? Lines 570 to 572 was quoted, but that's under the condition that the last sync resource version is empty, right? If it's available and not empty, it uses the last sync resource version. So that says we have another issue, right? Which is, yeah, we may solve some problem for the initial list, but if it ever has to go back and relist, we'd also like it to hit the watch cache.
Yes.
Possibly. Right now, that initial list causes like continual crash loops in the field sometimes. So
okay,
that seems like the first one I would target.
Okay, but
yeah,
I think.
And also this code, it's a little confusing. This is the watcher that's running in the API server that populates the watch cache. This is not the client.
Oh, I see.
Wait a minute, which code? What? This? The code on the screen
Oh,
is in the
sorry,
server?
I'm wrong. I'm thinking of the other one.
But
there are two.
Right.
Are you sure there are two? I think it's the same package.
Did we relist? I thought we'd relisted in the watch cache too if we needed. I think we have to be able to because etcd compaction.
Well, does the server import client go?
Yes.
Yeah.
It does anyway.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah. Of course. I knew that. Okay.
So it's been a lovely nerd sniping session.
I know, right? But, what are all the weird esoteric things about the system that play into this?
So for those being interested, I pasted a picture I painted earlier this week of the whole watch cache mechanism. I hope it's possible to.
Oh, that's amazing. Look at that.
Took me 2 hours to walk through all the logic.
I don't know how to make it
at
bigger.
The risk of being that guy, does this diagram correctly represent what happens on resource version 0?
No, this logic is not represented there.
Okay.
I can copy that to the Slack then. Everybody can increase the size.
So how do we move forward from this conversation? Do we want to capture action items, any volunteers, or just the action items? Looks like one of the action items was to understand the current behavior. I think we spent some time, probably we covered most of that.
Mike, I'd be willing to spend a session with you and maybe get Wojciech in and see if we can list out the current state of affairs a little more crisply and try and surface any of the problems that kept us from doing this before.
Okay, great. How do we schedule that? Yeah, I'm up for that.
Okay.
We don't have a shared calendaring scheduling thing though.
Yeah, maybe we can just chat on Slack and see. If
yeah, I'll just open a
Joe,
chat with you too. Or we'll do it in API Machinery.
Yeah, I think API Machinery chat would be good.
Okay.
Joe, can you involve polynomial, please? Okay.
Yeah, polynomial too. That'd be great.
So it's Joe and polynomial and Wojciech and me.
Yeah, and anybody else that wants to join.
Okay.
Yeah, this is, there are things going years back and my brain's foggy, but I'm going to try and pull out a bunch of old things that I remember from Clayton's issue and some other things that happened. I also remember Wojciech had at one point pointed to me to some of the more subtle problems in the watch cache that we'd have to sort out if we ever wanted to fix this. So maybe we can get that organized as well.
Okay, very good. I'm happy to help organize cross calendars if you guys can't figure it out, but I hope you can for people. Very good. So I will try to capture and put also, the links that were shared here in the agenda for posterity. Should we move to the last topic? Unless there is anything else to discuss on this one. We good? Okay. Mike, last topic is also yours.
Right. Well, again, it kind of came up earlier, and there were some positive echoes, so I thought I'd pursue it. This is part of it's just a very broad theme that we like the API machinery for building systems, and in order to use it, anybody designing with it needs to understand what it's going to cost. Right. We have a little bit of effort at SLOs. It seems to me it would make sense to have a maintained characterization of the costs of running this stuff, right? Like, and I'm not quite sure exactly what that would be, because the stuff you run it on it can be so different, but maybe some kind of a characterization. Example. When we run it on this, this kind of, request rate for these kind of requests costs this much CPU. This is what the memory, actually memory is a really important one, and that's a little bit more manageable. It's still squishy and complicated because at the end of the day, it's up to the kernel how much memory a process really has resident, which is what counts. But still we can say things like, okay, this is how much the watch cache is going to hold on to. This is the stuff. It seems to me it would make sense to have a maintained, CPU, maybe network and certainly memory, characterization of the costs of these the major control plane components, the API server, the informers seem like obvious candidates here.
So I'm not fully aware of what the scaling group produces when they measure when they do their scale tests. Maybe and can describe the gap between what they do and what you would like them to do.
I can describe my stunning ignorance. I know that there is a performance dashboard that has charts, a bunch of graphs of some measurements from some runs of some experiments. I have trouble actually understanding what any of that actually refers to specifically. But I think it's pretty clear that it's results of big stings, big runs that do a lot of stuff. So it's not kind of, breaking it down and analyzing it, right, into pieces that a designer could use.
I'm not adverse to trying to gather information. I don't know offhand what exactly I would do to do that, or how that compares with what we already collect.
So yeah, I'm not entirely clear either, but let me give you some kind of a flavor of an idea, right? So for example, for CPU, right, we could say, hey, okay, we're going to run this on a certain kind of machine, right? Pick an AWS or Google or whatever you like instance type, and say, okay, we're going to look at the CPU usage of the API server when we do, say, 100 QPS of, fetching a config map or updating a config map or something, right? And just say, what's it cost to sustain this workload, right? We can do, reads of a lot of different things. We can do kind of trivial, attribute updates of pretty much anything. So we can get kind of just what it costs to serve, pretty basic elements of workload. Similarly for network, again, we could easily enough measure that, right? So CPU and network are easy to measure, pretty easy to attribute. Memory, again, is more difficult because what you really care about is the resident memory.
So you're talking about collecting from the outside those pieces of data then? I'm just trying to make sure that you're even talking to the right people, right? Like if more information needs to be exposed, then if you wrote up a description of what we needed to expose and the cardinality on it, and then open a PR to do that, we could look at that, right? If it is instead you need to take what we already have and build a test scenario around it, I think we haven't historically done that.
So I think for the kinds of things I'm talking about, my suspicion is we don't really have a very clean test scenario, right? The test scenarios we have are pretty high level complex scenarios. So it's a little difficult to break it down into elements. Although I suppose you could look at that and get some aggregates, right? So you could say, for example, we ran. So for example, we could say, okay, during this scenario, we ran a total of this many requests through the API servers, and they did this much CPU work, this many CPU seconds over their lifetime. You could say that there's a certain, then the next thing I'm going to want to know is what's the background load, right? There's some amount of background maintenance. So I'd want to kind of figure that out. Then subtract the test activity from the background and, start to get some analysis of, the components of the cost. I'd like to know things like, you submit an update through one API server, and then there's notifications that come back to all of them. As a designer, right, I'd like to have a handle on the costs of handling those update notifications. Again, I don't have an exact, totally crisp ask here, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about?
I think it sounds like you want to use what we have already and build a test scenario and test it. And if that's the case, I think that our scaling tests, where that would actually be done, is not with this group, right? I mean, it's we have the SIG scalability, I think, to do that. They have an interest in doing stuff like this.
I'm not going to disagree on your main point. Just let me make sure I understand the first part of that if statement of yours. You said you're talking about, am I asking about taking what we already have or not? I'm not quite sure I follow that part of what you're saying. What do you mean by take what we already have?
I'm trying to figure out if there is some feature in the API server that is missing to allow you to imagine you want to go and do this just in your lab at IBM, right? What I'm looking at is there something the API server needs to add to make that possible? Because that would be a thing that if you identified and then built that, as long as it's not invasive, that's probably a thing we can get behind, right?
Thank you. Okay, now I understand that point.
I want to make this possible. I'm not prepared to sign up and say, yes, we should do this. And I want to make it possible, if you can identify those things, and you just need someone to vet a design and an implementation.
Right. Yeah, I think what I'm looking for is stuff that can be measured from the outside. In fact, I would go a little bit further and say, no, I'll just, categorically say, I definitely want to talking about stuff you would measure from the outside. I don't think we need to add anything to the server, and I'm perfectly fine with the answer that that falls under SIG scalability. That's I mean, it's not exactly a scaling question, I think, but I guess practically, yeah, you don't really care unless you're going to push it. So, yeah.
So I can't speak for how similar this is to the other tests. Sounds like you looked and maybe they aren't doing a test of this nature yet. But I wouldn't expect the API Machinery to pick that up as a side project, unless, you know, if you wanted to try to work on a joint project and you wanted to push on this. You know, I'm interested in the answer, just not interested enough in the answer to, you know, personally drive it. And I'm not sure it falls under the SIG to try to build that mechanism, because there's considerations other than just, can we build the thing? It's, can we build it? Do we have the maintainers over time? Do we have the funding to run it? And that sort of information, that scalability is already figured out.
That makes sense.
So do you want me to capture any conclusion of the conversations? Like,
I think the conclusion is that this is an issue for SIG scalability.
Yeah, okay.
And that if there is some information missing, some piece of information we need to add to the QAPI server, that, you know, bringing it back here and discussing that is valuable and it makes sense.
Thank you. Okay, I will capture that. 11:48 in Pacific time. Anything else that we want to cover today? Or otherwise looks like we're done. We good? I saw Joe added an additional link in the chat for pagination. I'm going to add it to the notes. And if that's all, we can conclude our meeting for today. Yes, okay. So thank you everybody for joining. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, wherever you are. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. See you.